Hello and welcome to the second part of the QF Test video tutorial about web UI testing with QF Test. As already mentioned in the first part of this video tutorial, I would like to point out that this video tutorial deals with testing web UIs. We use testing web UIs in place of all supported UI technologies like Java and Windows because the concepts and usage of QF tests are more or less the same. You can find explicit hints about the marginal differences in the written form of the tutorial. In the first part, we met a sample test suite, we started our first test run and took a look at reporting test results. In this part, we are going to create a test suite ourselves. You can find the content of this video in section 11, Creating Your Own Test Suite, in the written form of the tutorial. As first step, we are going to create a setup sequence in order to start our web application to test. Then we will go ahead with recording actions like mouse clicks and checks to verify the results within the UI. Afterwards, we will put all those actions and checks together into a test case and build a real test suite out of it. Then we will close the browser to have a clean environment before we start the actual test run, which will then the next part. So we will then start our test case to get a full test run. And last but not least, we will take a look at the improved component recognition for web applications and some hints about that. Now let's go into medias res. If you have already opened QF Test, we can create a new test suite via pressing the New Test Suite toolbar button. Okay, the first step was an easy one. We see that the new test suite has been created because of the question mark here in the tab folder. As next step, we need to start our web application which you would like to test. To do so, we press the Wound button in the QF Test toolbar. This action opens the Quick Start wizard. This wizard supports us in entering all necessary information which is required to start the web application. Furthermore, it will also create the corresponding nodes within the test suite at the end of this wizard. The first page contains general information and a link to the Quick Start chapter in the manual. So if you would like to spend time now, click the link and take a look at the manual. I click Next now to go ahead. Now we can choose the type of the tested application. As QF Test supports testing of Java applications, Windows and web applications, as well as testing of PDF documents and Electron applications, I need to decide how my application is actually started. In our case, we deal with a web application which we open in the browser, so I select a web application in a browser. And then I press Next. The third page, URL of the web page, is the most important part of testing a web application, because here we specify the URL of the web application. You can type it now, or you can also look for it via the Choose button, or you can also copy it to the clipboard like I did, and I paste it now. You can get the URL of the demo application from the previous demo suite, First Web Tests QFT, or you can also copy it out of the written tutorial. Once you have pasted it there, you can press Next. And now you can choose the browser which you would like to use to test your web application. By default, QF Test uses Google Chrome. If you want to use another browser, you can just open the combo box and switch to any browser you want. Microsoft Edge, Mozilla Firefox, Safari, and so on and so on. Of course, you can also adapt your test case to run it with a different browser later, or you run the test cases in different browsers, one after another. If we take a look at the left side of this wizard, we see that the browser is already an optional step. Actually, all the remaining pages of this wizard are not really necessary at the moment. The optional information, like the utilized Ajax toolkit or the browser settings, like the proxy settings for instance, can be filled by you if it's necessary in your project or in your environment. In my case, it's not necessary, so I can simply press Finish now. Finally, I reach the summary page, which shows all the information which I have entered to like the URL and the browser and all the browser settings once again. If I needed proxy settings, for instance, I could switch back to browser settings and change it there. Once I press Finish, I will get back to the summary page and just review the settings once again. In my case, everything is fine, so I can press Finish. Below the extras, in our test suite, a setup node has been created now. And this setup node contains the necessary steps to open the browser and to navigate to the web application. In the previous video, we have already discussed the content of that sequence. Just as a quick reminder, inside the sequence open browser window, you will find the URL of the application once again. And if you made a typo or if you just want to change it, you can change it there. Okay, then let's close the setup and start it via pressing Start Test Run in order to start the browser. Hooray, our web application has been started. Before we proceed, let's save the test suite so that we can make a profit of our achievements later. So I press on the disk on the Save File button in the QF Test toolbar, and I choose a path where I would like to store my test suite to. I choose the desktop, and I specify the name First Web Tests to it. Once I press Save, the test suite has been saved. I see the new name in the tab folder directly above the test suite. And now we are ready to record the first actions of our test case. The test case should select a vehicle like I5 on the Vehicles tab. Then it should select the Specials tab, and it should choose a Specials model like chess. So before I'm going to start the recording, I just reset my application, select the Vehicles tab, and now I'm ready to start. So I press Start Recording in the QF Test toolbar. And now the QF Test recording mode has been activated. This means that every step which I perform in the application now will be recorded and will be stored to QF Test. Okay, then let's go ahead. So I select the i5 vehicle model, then I choose the Specials tab, and I select the chess Specials. As last step, I do select the Vehicles tab once again. That's because I would like to keep the test step as independent as possible, so I can repeat that test step later once again, because the test step starts with the selection of the vehicle inside the Vehicle tab. The test suite hasn't been changed yet, but once I stop the recording via pressing Stop Recording on the QF Test toolbar, a new sequence will be inserted to the extras of the test suite. The sequence has the current date and time in its name. Within the sequence, we find the steps which I performed during recording. So we see a mouse click at the vehicle table to select the vehicle. Then we see a click on the Specials tab. We see a selection to select the chess entry, what we see at the end of the selection. And then we see a fourth mouse click to select the Vehicles tab again. Now I'm curious whether the recorded sequence can be replayed. Therefore, I select the sequence and I start it via pressing Start Test Run. The sequence was executed quite fast, and in the application we see I5 being selected, and on the Specials tab we see chess being selected. So it seems that the replay worked. In order to remember the content of that sequence later, let me rename it. So I select the sequence, and in its details I change the name to something meaningful to me, like Select Model I5 with Special Chess. And I confirm that change via pressing OK. And we got our first test step, and it's even possible to replay it. That's great. After recording a simple workflow, we should consider to record a verification step which verifies whether the workflow provides the expected results. So in our case, we can think about checking the price calculation like the result shown in the final price field. As the prices are stable in this application, replaying the selection of the same models should always provide the same final price. So how could we record such a verification step? Therefore, we press the green check in the QF Test toolbar, which activates the recording mode of checks. So we see the recording being enabled as well as the check recording, and that's the second recording mode of QF Test. It's the check recording mode. And if we switch to the application now and go to the field which you would like to check, like the final price field, we see that the target field has been surrounded by a black rectangle. If we open the context menu via a right mouse click, we get a list of every possible check provided by QF Test. So you can check the text of the text field, you can check whether it's editable or not, and you can check a couple of HTML attributes. In our case, we want to check the value of the text field, which is the text. So I select text and I stop the recording. We get a new sequence again named by the current date and current time. And if I open the sequence, I get a check text node. In the details of the check text node, we find the text attribute, which stands for the expected text. So if during replay the text field contains that particular text, so $13,049, the test will succeed. If the text field contains any other value than the expected one, the test will fail. By the way, we see two dollar characters here because the dollar character is a special character for QF Test. And escaping that dollar character is performed by using a second dollar character. This way of recording checks is supported for any kind of graphical objects, like text fields, buttons, or tables, and so forth. If you want to know more about the other attributes of a check node, like as regex, negate, and so on, you can use the What's This context help, or you directly jump into the QF Test manual. Before we run that sequence, let me rename it, so that we can remember what it actually stands for. In my case, I change it to check final price, and I confirm the renaming via pressing OK again. And finally, let me just run it once. So I select the sequence and I press Start Test Run. And it passed. That's fine. So we have opened the web application via a setup node. Then we have recorded the first sequence to select a model in my case. And then we have recorded a sequence check final price to verify whether the price calculation in the application was fine. So we have already a verification step. And those are the ingredients for our first test case. But where should we create the real test case now in QF Test? Where should we move or where should we put those nodes to? Before we do that, let's take a look at the structure of a test suite in QF Test. Every test suite consists of 4 major nodes. The first node is the test set node, which you will always find directly below the test suite. The test set node contains test cases. A test case node represents a real test case, and all the test results and statistics and special execution means are built to work with test cases. A test set node is just a group of test cases, so you can actually put as many test cases you want inside a test set. It's also possible to add sub-test sets to nest test sets inside test sets, so you can think about having a top group of test cases, then a subgroup, and so on and so on. The second node, the procedures node, is the location for reusable test steps which can be shared between test cases. We will take a look at this node in a video later. The extras node, so the node which we are currently working with, is the playground or the development area of QF Test. So every new sequence which will be recorded or which will be created by wizards will be stored to the extras first. There you can review it, you can change it, you can rename it, and once you have the feeling the sequence is a good one, you can move it either to a test case or to the procedures area. And the fourth and last node is the Windows and Components section, which holds the information of graphical objects and how QF Test recognizes them. Such graphical objects like text fields, buttons, checkboxes and so on are called components in QF Test. Basically, that's the heart of QF Test, because without that information about the graphical components, no test could be performed. QF Test recognizes the graphical components because of technical attributes, like their IDs, like their texts and so on. But you can find more information about this in the QF Test manual, and there is also another video about this in this tutorial later. Okay, but as we know the nodes now, we are also able to figure out where to put those sequences to. They should be put to the test case. So how can I move them? I can either use the context menu, cut or copy and paste, or even the keyboard shortcuts, or I can simply use the mouse and drag it to the corresponding location. So first I'm selecting the setup node and I move it via the mouse directly inside the test set, so directly before the test case, which means that every test case which is part of the test set relies on a running application, which is actually true, because every test case needs a running application. The two sequences, they are part of the test case. So I open the test case and then I mark the two sequences via holding the Shift key on the keyboard and selecting the sequences by the mouse. So it's actually the same concept as in any modern tool where you select elements or text objects and so on. And then you can move those sequences directly inside the test case. Before we start the test case now, just to figure out whether it's working, we should also think about the readability of our test cases. So we should specify meaningful names to the test case and to the test set node. So the test set node, the group of test cases, can be called something like demo tests, for instance, or tutorial tests, because those are the tests which I'm creating during my demo phase. And the test case can be called something like select vehicle, for instance. But let me give you one more advice with regards to readability of reports in QFTest. So we should select the sequence select model I5 with special chess, open the context menu and choose transform node into test step. Now the sequence has been changed to a test step and its content is still the same. So we still have the 4 events in it. Why have I done this? The name of a test step, in my case select model I5 with special chess, will be written into the QFTest report after the test run. The name of a sequence won't be written into the QFTest report. So sequences are just internal grouping or sequence nodes within a test suite, and the test step is something which I also see in the results in the QFTest reports. And so I am also transforming the second sequence into a test step because I would like to see that particular name in the HTML report of QFTest. And if I see that information in the HTML report, it's even simpler to identify the location of an error once an error should occur. Last but not least, one step is still missing in our test suite. It's a cleanup step which is missing. And that cleanup step is actually closing the browser at the end of the test run again. Perhaps you could recall the previous video about section 10. The sample test suite there also contained a setup node, test cases, and a cleanup node to close the browser at the end. So how can we create such a cleanup node? If that cleanup node is closing the browser, let's simply record closing the browser. So I start the recording and I close the browser via pressing X. Then I stopping the recording and I get a new sequence which contains a window event closing. Now I can rename the sequence to something like close browser and confirm it. Close browser is still a regular sequence now, but I would like to have a cleanup sequence instead of a sequence. So how could I change this? Therefore, I'm using the transform command again from the context menu. And there I will find a cleanup node. And now the sequence has been turned into a cleanup node. So I would like to move that to our test set now. And I would like to have the cleanup at the same level as the setup and the test case. And because of that, I need to close the test case. And then I can move the cleanup via drag and drop to the test set again. And so I have a structure like a setup node in order to start the web application. Then I have a test case, which consists of 2 test steps, a workflow and a verification of the workflow. And finally, we have a cleanup step, which is closing the browser. And here we are. That's our first test suite. Yeah, then let's start it and see what's happening. So I'm selecting the test suite and I press Start Test Run. That execution was quite fast. The browser appeared, clicks have been performed, and the browser was closed. In the status line on the right bottom corner, we see that the test execution finished. We had one test case being executed, which was successful, so we have 100% success rate. In order to see what really happened, we can open the QF Test Run log via the toolbar button, and there we see that the test set, the test case, and all the steps have been executed. But more on run logs, again, later in another video of the QF Test tutorial. In the last part of this tutorial, we talk about improvements to the component recognition of web applications. QF Test provides a so-called custom web resolver for this purpose. In the setup sequence, inside the if to launch the browser, we find a sequence called install custom web resolver. This sequence contains a call procedure node to a procedure called install custom web resolver. In its details, we can adapt and translate specifics of your utilized web framework to the standard means of QF Test. Due to that, the recordings of test cases become more readable and the test execution becomes more stable and robust. But what does that mean? Let's take a look at the first test step of our first test case, which we have recently recorded. In the first test step, we select a vehicle called I5. This is achieved by a mouse click, and inside the mouse click we can see that we click on a vehicle table, and then we click in a column called model, which stands for the column heading in the application, and then it clicks on the fourth element. In chapter 13, we will learn how to adapt this in order to select the vehicle by its text. So we will then change this to the same way like we address tabs, like in the second click for the selecting of the special step. But that's what we will see in video of chapter 13. This improved readability is the first result of the custom web resolver. A second feature of the custom web resolver influences the checks which can be recorded by QF Test. So if we start the check recording for the final price field once again, we get a couple of checks provided. And the check for the text and the check for the editable state or for many HTML attributes are already provided by the custom web resolver. So the simple way to address content of tables or the enhanced checking capabilities are provided by the custom web resolver. If no custom web resolver should be used, QF Test will record the events, but those events will be more difficult to read and maintain. Furthermore, the recognition of the graphical objects won't be that robust as with the custom web resolver. So a custom web resolver really enables you to customize QF Test specially tailored to your utilized web toolkit. QF Test already provides a custom web resolver for the most popular toolkits like Angular, Vardin, XJS or ZK. As no real standards for developing graphical objects of web applications have been existing, it could become necessary to introduce a custom web resolver to your project. In this case, the support team will gladly assist. At the moment, you should be aware that the custom web resolver supports you to make the test execution more robust and the test recordings more readable. You find more information about this topic on a couple of videos on this channel. And this brings us back to the end of the chapter 11, creating your own test suite. We talked about a setup sequence to open the web application. We recorded actions to replay a workflow in our test case. Then we verified its result by recording a check. We gave meaningful names to the sequences, which we transformed to test steps then, and we also moved the setup and the test step to the test cases later in order to build up our test suite. So the test case was then placed below the test set area. In order to complete our test set, we recorded a sequence to close the browser, which we also transformed into a cleanup node. Then we started the full test run, and we heard about the custom web resolver in the setup node, which is actually pretty important in order to get robust test cases later, but that's something which we will hear more about in videos later. The next chapter is about reusing already recorded sequences via procedures. Until then, I wish you much success and lots of fun in creating your first test suite.